How a cup of tea started wars and destroyed empires. Welcome back to Listen and Learn Tales. Do you want to improve your English while listening to some of the most fascinating and mysterious stories from around the world? You're in the right place. Here, you can listen to clear English, read the text on your screen, and repeat the sentences to practice your speaking. Today, we are diving into the story of something you probably have in your kitchen right now. Something millions of people drink every day. Something that started wars, destroyed empires, and changed the world forever. I'm talking about tea. Yes, tea. That simple cup you enjoy every morning has a dark and twisted history. A history of queens, spies, smugglers, opium, and bloody wars. A history where tens of thousands of people died, all connected to this humble leaf. But today's story is different. We've done our research. We've checked the facts. Everything I'm about to tell you is based on historical records, academic sources, and verified accounts. This isn't just a story, it's the true history of tea. So, make yourself a cup of tea, yes, right now, go make one, and get comfortable. Because the true story I'm about to tell you is one you've probably never heard before. Let's begin. Listen carefully, read along, and don't forget to repeat the sentences out loud to practice your English. The strange afternoon in 1662. It was May in the year 1662. The King of England, Charles II, had just married a Portuguese princess. Her name was Catherine of Braganza. She was the daughter of King John IV of Portugal. After the wedding, as tradition demanded, the new queen had to travel to her husband's homeland. King Charles II crossed the sea and brought his new bride to England. The queen was exhausted. It had been a long, difficult journey. She wanted to rest. But first, she remembered a habit from her homeland. She called the servants and asked, "I am very tired. Can someone bring me a cup of tea?" When the queen said these words, there was confusion. The queen wanted to drink tea. But there was a big problem. At that time in Britain, very few people knew what tea was. It was not a common drink. The famous English writer Samuel Pepys wrote in his diary on September 25, 1660, just 2 years before the Queen's arrival, that he sent for a cup of tea, a China drink, of which I never had drank before. If a well-connected man like Pepys had never tasted tea before 1660, it shows how rare tea was in England at that time. So, when Queen Catherine asked for tea, people were confused. What is this thing called tea? Is it something you eat from a tree? Is it some kind of animal? No one understood. On that day, the Queen of England could not get a cup of tea, because almost no one in her new kingdom had it. This is a strange story, isn't it? A queen asks for something so simple, and no one can give it to her. But here is the most amazing part. Fast forward less than 200 years. The people of Britain became one of the biggest tea-drinking nations on earth. Today, the British drink about 165 million cups of tea every single day. Britain became involved in wars over tea. Tens of thousands of people died in conflicts connected to the tea trade. A thing that almost no one knew. A thing that even a queen could not get when she asked for it. That thing became the national drink of Britain. And then, Britain spread this thing to the entire world. So, let me tell you the incredible true story of how this happened. The true origin of tea. Many people think that tea was invented by the British. But the actual truth is completely different. Tea's history begins in China, thousands and thousands of years ago. According to botanists and geologists, the tea plant, scientifically called Camellia sinensis, has existed on Earth for 60 to 70 million years. But humans only began using it much later. Based on historical records and archaeological evidence, our ancestors in China began cultivating and using tea plants more than 3,000 years ago. This was during the time of the Zhou dynasty, around 1100 BCE. One ancient text,
The Huayang Guoji, Chronicles of Huayang, records that people in the Ba and Shu regions, modern-day Sichuan, were cultivating tea and offering it as tribute to the Zhou emperor as early as 1066 BCE. There is also a famous legend about tea's discovery. According to this legend, the mythical emperor Shennong, known as the Divine Farmer, discovered tea around 2737 BCE. The story says that he was boiling water when leaves from a wild tea tree blew into his pot. He tried the drink and found it refreshing. However, historians caution that this is just a legend. There is no archaeological evidence that Shennong was a real person. He is considered a mythological figure representing the discovery of herbal medicine in Chinese culture. The story suggests that tea may have first been used as a medicine before becoming a daily drink. The important fact is this: by 3,000 years ago, tea was already part of Chinese life. People drank it. They ate it. They used it as medicine. And for many centuries, only China knew about this remarkable plant. Tea spreads across Asia. For hundreds of years, tea remained mainly in China. But slowly, it began to spread to neighboring countries. Buddhist monks played an important role in this spread. When Chinese monks traveled to Japan for religious purposes, they took tea with them. According to historical records, tea was introduced to Japan around 593 CE, during the time of Prince Shotoku, along with Buddhism, Chinese culture, and art. At first, the monks drank tea for themselves, perhaps to stay awake during long meditation sessions. But they also gave tea as gifts to their followers. It wasn't an extremely expensive thing, so sharing it was easy. In this way, Buddhist monks first brought tea from China to Japan. Then, slowly and gradually, tea began to spread throughout Asia. But still, tea was not just a casual drink. If someone had an illness or a digestive problem, they might use tea as medicine. The concept of waking up in the morning and just having a cup of tea for pleasure hadn't started yet outside of China. Tea arrives in Europe through Portugal. Now comes the important twist that connects to our Queen story. European travelers first encountered tea in China and Japan around the middle of the 16th century. Portuguese traders were the first Europeans to reach China by sea, and they established a trading post at Macau on the southern coast of China. The Portuguese were in China mainly to buy silk and spices. But the Chinese traders showed them something else. "Look," they said, "we have this thing called tea that is quite popular here. Take some and see how it is. It's not expensive. See if the people in your country enjoy drinking it." The Portuguese were interested. According to historical records, in 1557, after Portugal established its colony at Macau, the Portuguese began bringing tea back to their country. This was the first time tea entered Europe. In 1559, a Venetian writer named Giambattista Ramusio mentioned Chinese tea in his book Navigazioni et Viaggi, Travels and Voyages. This was the first time tea appeared in European literature. However, tea did not become popular in Europe immediately. The long sea journey was difficult. Tea is sensitive to moisture, and shipbuilding technology at the time was not advanced enough to create waterproof compartments for storing tea properly. It wasn't until the early 17th century that tea began to arrive in Europe in larger quantities. In 1610, the Dutch East India Company officially imported tea to Europe for the first time. In 1650, the Dutch began importing Chinese tea, black tea, to Europe. Initially, tea was extremely expensive, a luxury only for the wealthy. It was sold not only for drinking but also as medicine in apothecaries. Tea comes to England. Tea first arrived in England through the Dutch. In the 1650s, tea was being advertised for sale in London, but it was rare and very costly. Then came Catherine of Braganza. When Catherine married Charles II in 1662, she brought more than just herself to England. She brought her personal belongings,
including several trunks of luxury items popular with the Portuguese aristocracy. Among these items were several crates of loose-leaf tea. Catherine loved tea. She had grown up drinking it in Portugal, which had direct access to Chinese tea through Macau. After arriving in England, she continued her daily tea-drinking habit. The royal court noticed. The Queen drank tea every day. Soon, members of the aristocracy began copying her. They wanted to be fashionable like the Queen. There's even a famous story, though it may be more legend than fact, about a tea theft at Catherine's wedding banquet. According to this tale, many nobles at the wedding were curious about what the Queen was drinking from her elegant cup. The French Queen, Catherine's rival, supposedly sent a spy to steal some of the mysterious leaves. The spy was caught, creating a scandal. Whether true or not, this story shows how tea became a symbol of fashion and intrigue in the English court. 1 year after Catherine's arrival, in 1663, the poet Edmund Waller wrote a poem for her birthday. The poem included these lines. Venus her myrtle, Phoebus has his bays. Tea both excels, which she vouchsafes to praise. This is the earliest known poetic praise of tea in English literature. So, the historical record is clear. While tea existed in England before Catherine, she made it fashionable. She popularized tea drinking among the upper classes. The East India Company enters the tea trade. The British East India Company saw an opportunity. They noticed that tea was becoming popular among the wealthy. So, they began importing more tea. The East India Company's trade with China grew steadily. In the late 17th century, the average amount of tea brought to England was about £20,000 per year. By 1700, the company's instructions to its traders included orders for specific types of tea, 300 tubs of fine green tea and 80 tubs of bohea, a type of black tea. In 1703, the orders were even larger, £75,000 of Singlo green tea, £10,000 of imperial tea, and £20,000 of bohea tea. The average price of tea at this time was 16 shillings per pound. To understand how expensive this was, 16 shillings in 1700 would be equivalent to several £100s today. Tea was truly a luxury item. But things were changing. Between 1710 and 1810, the East India Company sold a total of £750 million of tea, worth almost £130 million sterling. A large portion of this, £116 million, was re-exported to other European countries. The volume of tea imported increased dramatically. In 1728, British consumption was about £1.5 million. By 1785, it had grown to over £10 million. By 1833, just before the company's monopoly ended, consumption reached nearly £32 million. How did tea become everyone's drink? Now the question is, how did this luxury drink for wealthy women become a drink for everyone? Several factors contributed to tea's spread to the masses. First, the East India Company increased imports. As they brought more tea, the price gradually decreased. What was once only for the aristocracy slowly became affordable for the middle classes. Second, changing work habits. During this time, working-class people drank ale and beer. But these alcoholic drinks caused problems. Workers would get drunk during the day and couldn't work properly. Factory owners began looking for alternatives. Third, tea was easy to prepare. Compared to coffee, which required roasting and grinding, tea was simpler. Just add hot water to the leaves. Fourth, tea could be sweetened with sugar. Sugar from Britain's Caribbean colonies was becoming cheaper. Sweet tea provided energy, which was appealing to workers doing physical labor. As tea became more common among working people, its image changed. It was no longer just a women's drink or a luxury for the rich. When factory workers drank tea, ordinary people thought, if they can drink it, I can too. By the early 19th century, tea had become a regular part of British household life. Tea, taxes, and smuggling. The British government saw that people were buying more and more tea. So, they did what governments always do, they imposed taxes. The taxes were extremely high. During most of the 18th century, the duty on tea was about 200% of its value. Only between 1784 and 1795, when the tax was temporarily reduced to 12.5%, did it become more reasonable. Such high taxes created a huge problem: smuggling. It is estimated that the amount of tea that legally entered Britain with duty paid probably represented less than half of all the tea actually consumed in the country. Smugglers brought tea from Europe, especially from the Netherlands and France, where tea was cheaper. They landed on remote beaches at night and moved the illegal goods inland. Along with smuggling came adulteration, mixing fake ingredients with real tea. Unscrupulous sellers would add other leaves, grass, or even sawdust to stretch their tea supply. This was dangerous because some additives could be harmful. The smuggling problem became so serious that in 1784, the government passed the Commutation Act, which dramatically reduced the tea tax to discourage smuggling. The act worked. Legal tea imports increased immediately. In 1783, legal consumption was £4.7 million. In 1784, it jumped to £10.1 million. In 1785, it reached £14.8 million. The problem with China. As Britain's tea addiction grew, a major problem developed. Britain had nothing that China wanted to buy in return. For years, the system worked like this: British merchants came to China. They brought wool, cotton, and other goods from Britain and its colonies. But the Chinese weren't interested in these products. They wanted payment in silver. This created a huge trade deficit for Britain. Silver flowed out of Britain and into China. By the early 19th century, the situation was becoming unsustainable. The British needed something that China would buy. They found their answer in India: opium. The opium trade, a dark chapter. Opium is a narcotic drug made from poppy seeds. It was grown in the Bengal region of India, which was under British control. The East India Company had a monopoly on opium production in India. Although the non-medical use of opium had been illegal in China since the early 1700s, the law was not effectively enforced. British merchants began smuggling opium into China, selling it to Chinese drug dealers for silver. The trade grew enormously. In 1730, about 15 tons of opium were exported to China. By 1773, it had increased to 75 tons. In 1787, the East India Company was sending 4,000 chests of opium per year, each chest containing about 77 kilograms or 170 pounds. By the 1830s, the amount had increased dramatically. China was facing a serious crisis. Millions of people were becoming addicted to opium. And now, instead of silver flowing into China, vast amounts of silver were flowing out to pay for the drug. The Daoguang Emperor of China's Qing dynasty decided to take action. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. In 1839, the emperor sent a special commissioner named Lin Zexu to Canton, modern Guangzhou, to end the opium smuggling. Lin took strong action. He arrested Chinese merchants involved in the trade. He surrounded the foreign factories and demanded that all opium be handed over. The British Superintendent of Trade, Charles Elliot, ordered British merchants to comply. More than 20,000 chests of opium, about 1,400 tons, were surrendered and destroyed. The British merchants suffered massive financial losses. They demanded compensation from both China and the British government. China refused to pay. The British government also refused at first. Tensions increased. In July 1839, a fight broke out between British sailors and Chinese villagers. One or more Chinese villagers were killed. The Chinese demanded that the British hand over the sailors for trial. The British refused, saying they would not subject British subjects to Chinese justice, which they considered unfair. In late 1839, British warships attacked Chinese vessels in the Pearl River Delta, destroying 29 ships. The First Opium War had begun. The war was completely one-sided. Britain had a modern navy with powerful guns. China had no navy to match them. British ships attacked coastal cities at will. In 1840, a large British naval fleet arrived from England. Later that year, they were joined by the Nemesis, an advanced new warship that could navigate China's shallow rivers. The British captured several coastal cities. In 1842, they advanced up the Yangtze River, China's most important waterway, and captured the city of Nanjing. They cut off the Grand Canal, which was essential for transporting food to Beijing. The Chinese had no choice but to surrender. The Treaty of Nanjing and its consequences. On August 29, 1842, China and Britain signed the Treaty of Nanjing. This was the first of what the Chinese called the unequal treaties. The treaty forced China to pay huge war reparations to Britain for the cost of the war and for the destroyed opium. Open 5 ports to British trade: Canton, Amoy, Xiamen, Foochow, Fuzhou, Ningpo, Ningbo, and Shanghai. Cede Hong Kong Island to Britain in perpetuity. Hong Kong would remain under British control for 155 years, until it was returned to China in 1997. In 1843, Britain and China signed the Supplementary Treaty of the Bogue, which gave British citizens in China the right of extraterritoriality, meaning they could only be tried by British courts, even for crimes committed in China. It also gave Britain most favored nation status, meaning any privileges given to other countries would automatically apply to Britain as well. Other Western powers quickly demanded similar treaties. The United States and France soon forced China to give them the same rights. The Opium War weakened the Qing dynasty and opened China to foreign exploitation. It would lead to further conflicts, including the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, which involved France as well and resulted in even more concessions from China. The human cost. What was the human cost of these conflicts? According to historical records, China suffered approximately 47,790 killed or wounded during the First Opium War. British casualties were over 2,800 killed or wounded. In the Second Opium War, thousands more died. The Old Summer Palace in Beijing, a masterpiece of Chinese architecture and art, was looted and burned to the ground by British and French troops in 1860. But beyond the battle deaths, millions of Chinese people suffered from opium addiction. By some estimates, millions of Chinese were addicted to opium by the mid-19th century. Families were destroyed. The social fabric of Chinese society was damaged. This was the dark side of the tea trade. The British people's desire for tea was paid for, indirectly, with the suffering of the Chinese people. Stealing the secrets of tea. Even after the war, Britain still had one big problem: tea only grew in China. Britain wanted to grow tea in its own colonies. So, they sent a man named Robert Fortune on a secret mission. Robert Fortune was a Scottish botanist and plant hunter. Between 1843 and 1846, he traveled through China collecting plants for the Royal Horticultural Society. But his later missions, funded by the East India Company, were different. Fortune's mission was to learn the secrets of Chinese tea production. He traveled disguised as a Chinese merchant, because foreigners were not allowed to travel freely in China's interior. Over several years, Fortune accomplished remarkable things. He learned how tea was cultivated and processed. He studied the methods used by Chinese tea farmers. He collected tea plants and seeds. In 1848 to 1849, he shipped thousands of tea plants and seeds from China to India. He recruited Chinese tea experts. He convinced skilled Chinese tea workers to come to India and teach their methods. These plants and experts were taken to the hill regions of India, especially Assam and the Darjeeling area, where conditions were similar to China's tea-growing regions. The results were dramatic. By the 1860s, Indian tea was being sold in Britain. In 1881, Britain imported £45 million of Indian tea. By 1885, it was almost £64 million. Soon, tea was also being grown in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and other British colonies. Britain no longer depended on China for its favorite drink. Tea in America, the Boston Tea Party. Tea played an important role in another major historical event, the American Revolution. By the 1770s, tea was popular in the American colonies. But the colonists were angry about British taxes. They had no representation in the British Parliament, yet they were being taxed on various goods, including tea. In 1773, the British government passed the Tea Act, which gave the East India Company a monopoly on tea sold in America. This angered colonial merchants who had been smuggling Dutch tea. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 British ships in Boston Harbor. They threw 342 chests of tea into the water. This protest, known as the Boston Tea Party, was one of the events that led to the American Revolutionary War. When the British government punished Boston by closing the port, other colonies rallied to support Massachusetts. The War for American Independence began in 1775. So, tea was involved in the birth of the United States as well. The legacy of tea. So, what can we learn from this history? A simple cup of tea connects us to a complex global story. That story includes ancient Chinese civilization, where tea was first cultivated 3,000 years ago. Portuguese traders, who first brought tea to Europe in the 16th century. A Portuguese queen, Catherine of Braganza, who made tea fashionable in England in 1662. British workers, who made tea their everyday drink in the 18th and 19th centuries. Smugglers and tax evaders, who illegally brought tea into Britain. Opium traders, who destroyed Chinese lives to pay for Britain's tea. Wars that killed tens of thousands, fought so Western powers could force China to trade. Botanical spies, who stole tea plants and secrets from China. Colonial plantations, where tea was grown using indentured labor in India and Sri Lanka. American revolutionaries, who threw tea into Boston Harbor as a protest against British rule. Today, tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world, after water. It is grown in dozens of countries. It is drunk by billions of people every day. But behind every cup is this long and complicated history. A history of culture and commerce, of empire and exploitation, of crime and punishment, of war and peace. The next time you sip your morning tea, take a moment to think about the journey that humble leaf has taken to reach your cup. It traveled across centuries and continents. It passed through the hands of queens and slaves, merchants and smugglers, soldiers and spies. It was part of events that changed the course of world history. And it all started with a simple request from a tired queen: "Can someone bring me a cup of tea?" And that brings us to the end of this incredible true story. Thank you for staying with us until the end here at Listen and Learn Tales. We hope this historically accurate deep dive into the history of tea was not only fascinating but also helpful for your English learning journey. How was your experience? Did you read the text on the screen carefully? Did you practice listening to the pronunciation? Did you try to repeat some of the sentences to improve your speaking? This method of listening, reading, and repeating is one of the best ways to improve your English fluency. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps our channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with a friend who is also learning English. Let's learn together. What story would you like to hear next? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and happy learning. See you in the next video.